Have you ever wondered why dogs kept barking at a particular person or thing? Have you ever tasted Akara so delicious? It changed the course of an entire village in the quiet town of Ogbede. A mysterious newcomer, named Eon, arrived with nothing but a frying pan and a secret recipe. Little did the villagers know that her crispy golden bean cakes would not only captivate their taste buds, but also unravel a web of hid truths. What secrets does Iun hold? And how will her presence affect the close-knit community of OG in the peaceful village of Ogbede? Life moved slowly. The villagers woke up early, fetching water from the stream, tending to their farms and gathering in the evening under the big yoko tree to discuss the day's events. Everyone knew each other. It was a place where news travelled fast and seek did not stay hidden for long. The people of OGB were simple but superstitious. They believed in spirits, ancestors, and the power of the unseen. Even though modern life was creeping into the village, many still held on to the old ways. If a child fell sick or something strange happened, they would first consult the village elders or visit Baba, the town's herbalist. One day, a new face arrived in OG. Her name was Iun. She moved into the village, quietly renting a small hut at the edge of the market square. No one knew much about her past, and she didn't offer any details, but it didn't take long for the villagers to warm up to her. Una wasted no time. Setting up her Akara business, her frying pan was always busy, and the smell of sizzling bean cakes quickly spread through the market. People began to gather around her stall, drawn by the mouthwatering aroma. Her ara was perfect, crispy golden on the outside, and soft and delicious on the inside. From the very first bite, people were hooked. Word of her ara spread like wildfire, and soon it wasn't just the people of OG flocking to her storm. Even people from neighbouring villages began to visit, eager to taste the ara. Everyone was talking about in the evenings. You could hear people at her stall arguing over who would get the next batch of hot Akara straight from the frying pan. There were always long lines at her stall, and sometimes tempers would flare as people jostled for a place in line. "I came first," one man would shout. "No, you didn't. I've been standing here before you," another would argue back. Ian would smile at them as she continued to fry her bean cakes. "There's enough for everyone," she would say calmly, flipping the ara with her wooden spatula. But even with the crowd and the noise, nobody seemed to mind the wait. Once they took a bite of Akara, it was worth it. The villagers couldn't get enough. Most people couldn't go a day without eating from her stool, and they praised her endlessly for her skill. "Ifunanya's Akara is the best I've ever tasted." Chidinma, one of her regular customers, would say with a smile, "I can't go a day without buying from her." Everyone agreed that Ian's Akara was the best thing to happen to the village. It became a routine for most people the moment her frying pan hit the fire. A crowd would gather. People craved it so much that it became part of their daily lives. But while the villagers were drawn to her aro, not everyone in Ogiz seemed to be a fan, especially the dogs in the neighbourhood. Whenever Orna passed by carrying her bowl of ungrounded beans, the village dogs behaved strangely, as though they could sense something nobody else could. Ifan was a woman in her early 30s, with a calm and quiet presence. She had soft brown eyes that often seemed lost in thought, and smooth dark skin that glowed under the sun. She dressed simply, usually in a wrapper and a loose blouse, and her movements were graceful and deliberate. There was a mystery about her. Ifan rarely spoke about her past, or why she had moved to Ogbede. The villagers, curious at first, eventually accepted her silence. What mattered most to them was her ara, which had become the talk of the village and beyond. But while the villagers couldn't get enough of her food, there was something else happening that was becoming hard to ignore. From the day Iun arrived, the village dogs reacted strangely. Whenever she passed by, they would bark loudly, growl, and sometimes even chase after her. As days passed, the barking didn't stop. In fact, it seemed to get worse. The dogs weren't just following the smell of food, they were barking at Una herself. Even when her tray was empty, the dogs would bark, as though they were chasing something unseen. At first, the villagers brushed it off. "It's the smell of the food," they said. "Who wouldn't want a taste of that ara? I'm sure the dogs want some too," another villager added, smiling. The explanation seemed simple enough. The sight of dogs chasing after food wasn't unusual, especially with the delicious aroma that filled the air around Yoon's stall. But as days passed, the barking didn't stop. It only got louder and more aggressive. Even when Ifunanya wasn't carrying her a carrot tray, the dogs still barked continuously. Whenever they saw her, some villagers thought it was because Iun was new in the village. The dogs just need to get used to her. China's father said once they know her, they'll stop barking for a while. This seemed like a reasonable explanation. Ogbede was a small community and strangers were rare. Perhaps the dogs simply needed time. But as the pairing continued and grew more intense, it became clear that something else was at play. The strange behaviour of the dogs continued, and it didn't take long for Chidinma to grow more uneasy. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper going on there. Barking was no longer just an odd occurrence, it seemed to happen every single time Yoon passed by, and it was getting harder to ignore. Chidinma had always liked Ifun. She visited her stall almost every morning, drawn not just by the delicious Ara, but by Iron's kind nature. Yet the constant barking was unsettling. It gnawed at her mind, making her wonder if there was more to Ifunanya. Then met the eye one evening. Chida sat with her grandmother outside their hut, watching the sun set over the village. The air was calm, but her mind was filled with questions. After a long silence, she finally spoke up. "Grandma, do you think there's something wrong with Thune?" She asked, her voice hesitant. "The dogs won't stop barking at her. It's like they see something we can't." Her grandmother, an old woman with silver hair and deep wrinkles carved by time, looked at her thoughtfully. "Dogs don't bark like that for no reason," she said, her voice soft but firm. "They see what the eyes of men cannot see." Chidinma frowned. "But why? She's just an Ara seller." Her grandmother shook her head. "Sometimes things are not as simple as they appear. There are forces beyond what we understand. If the dogs won't leave her alone, there must be a reason." Chidinma's heart raced. "What should I do?" The old woman leaned forward, lowering her voice, as if sharing a secret. "There is a woman in our home village. Her name is Neca. She's known to know things beyond the ordinary. People say she has a gift. She can see what is hidden and speak with the spirits." Chidinma had heard stories of Neca before. The elderly woman was known for her wisdom and her ability to see beyond the physical world. Many people had visited her in the past for guidance, but it was rare to hear her name spoken openly. Nuz knowledge was said to come from the ancestors, and only the brave sought her advice. "You must visit her," her grandmother continued. "If you truly want answers, Naa will know what to do, but be prepared. Sometimes the truth is not what we expect." Chidinma swallowed hard. She wasn't sure what she was hoping to find, but the thought of seeking out Neca made her nervous. Still, she knew she couldn't ignore what was happening. Iun was too much of a mystery, and the dogs seemed to know something no one else did. "Thank you, Grandma," Chidinma said quietly. "I'll go tomorrow." As the evening deepened and the crickets began to chirp, Chidinma made up her mind. She would make the journey to her home village and seek out the wisdom of Ni. Whatever secrets Ifunanya was hiding, it was time to uncover them. The morning sun had barely risen when Chidinma set off for her home village. Her grandmother had given her some food for the journey, and with determination in her heart, she began the long walk along the narrow, dusty paths that led to her childhood home. It had been years since she last visited, but the path was familiar. The village where Naa lived was small, hidden away among tall trees and thick bushes. The further Chidinma walked, the quieter her surroundings became, with only the sound of birds and the rustling of leaves keeping her company. The closer she got to the village, the heavier her thoughts felt. She wondered what Neca, the elderly woman known for seeing beyond the ordinary, would say about Ifun and the dogs that kept barking. After several hours, Chidinma reached her home village. It looked just as she remembered, with small huts scattered along the road and children playing in the fields. She didn't stop to greet anyone, her mind focused on her mission. She had to find Neca. Neca lived on the outskirts of the village, a small quiet hut surrounded by trees. Chidinma approached the door slowly, her heart pounding. The stories she had heard about Neca came rushing back. The woman who could see what others couldn't, who could speak with the spirits. People came to her when they needed guidance, but her knowledge often came with warnings summoning her courage. Chidinma knocked softly on the wooden door. After a few moments, the door creaked open, and Naa stood there, as if she had been expecting her. The old woman was small and bent with age, her skin wrinkled from many years under the sun. Her eyes, however, were sharp and piercing, as though they could see straight through to your soul. "I knew you would come." Ni said quietly, stepping aside to let Chidinma in. Chidinma followed her inside the small, dimly lit room. The smell of herbs and dried leaves filled the air, and strange objects hung from the walls, bundles of plants, small calabashes, and jars filled with mysterious liquids. There was a heavy silence in the room, as though it held many secrets. Necamo for Chidinma to sit on a low stool near the fire. She studied Chidinma for a long moment before speaking. "You've come about Ifunanya," she said, her voice calm but serious. Chidinma nodded, surprised that Ni already knew. "Yes, it's about her. The dogs in the village, they keep barking at her. It's like they can sense something that we can't." "My grandmother said you might know why." Ni closed her eyes for a moment, as though listening to something far away. When she opened them again, she looked directly into Chid's eyes. "The dogs are not barking without reason," she said softly. "They sense something dark around Iun, something that she carries with her wherever she goes." Chidinma leaned forward, her heart racing. "What is it? What has she done?" But Naa shook her head. "It is not for me to say. Ifun must speak the truth herself. If she is ever to be free of the shadows that haunt her, she must confess what she has done. Only then Can she find peace? Chidinma felt a weight settle in her chest. She had hoped NECA would tell her the secret, but it seemed that Ifan was the only one who could reveal it. What should I do? Chidinma asked quietly, unsure of how to confront Ifan. Neka's voice was firm. As she replied, go back to OG and ask her. She must say it with her own mouth, or the dark spirits will continue to follow her. The dogs will not stop barking until the truth comes out. Chidinma nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the task ahead. Neka's words echoed in her mind. As she stood to leave, thank you, Chidinma whispered, feeling a mix of gratitude and uncertainty as she stepped out of the hut and began her journey back to Ojd. Her thoughts swirled with questions. What could Iun possibly be hiding? How would she react when confronted? Chidinma didn't have the answers, but she knew that the time had come for the truth to be revealed. Chidinma returned to OG just as the sun was beginning to set. The village was quiet, the usual hustle of the market fading, as people finished their evening meals and prepared for the night, but Chidinma's mind was anything but quiet. Nee's words weighed heavily on her heart, and she couldn't stop thinking about what Iu might be hiding. The dogs had already started barking in the distance as Chidinma approached the market square. She saw Yoon packing up her stall for the day. She seemed calm, as she always did, carefully stacking her baskets and wiping down her frying pan. But the barking of the dogs, though distant, served as a constant reminder that something was not right. Taking a deep breath, Chidinma walked up to her. Ifunanya, can I speak with you for a moment? Ifunanya looked up, a small smile on her lips. Of course, Chidinma. How are you? Chidinma hesitated for a second, then glanced around to make sure no one was listening. I need to ask you something important. The smile faded from Yunan's face as she sensed the seriousness in Chidinma's voice. What is it? She asked, her tone suddenly cautious. Chidinma stepped closer, her heart racing. The dogs, they won't stop barking at you. It's been happening for weeks now, and it's getting worse. The whole village is starting to talk, and I visited someone for advice, someone who can see things others can't. If's eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing. I went to NECA, the SC. Chidinma continued, her voice barely above a whisper. She told me that the dogs are barking for a reason, that they sense something dark around you. She said you're carrying a secret, Ifuna, a secret that you have to confess if you ever want to find peace. There was a long silence between them. Iun stared at Chidinma, her face unreadable for a moment. It seemed as though she might deny everything, but then something in her expression shifted. Yuna lowered her gaze and sighed deeply. So NECA knows, she murmured. Her voice was soft, almost defeated. She turned away from she did and began fiddling with the cloth on her stall, her hands trembling slightly. Chidinma watched, her heart pounding. What is it, Yuna? What have you done? Ifunanya stood still for a long time, her back to Chidinma. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. I never wanted it to come to this, she said, her words slow and deliberate. I just wanted to make a living, to survive. Chidinma waited, her pulse quickening. As Iun continued, I wasn't always like this. Iun began, I had nothing. I grew up an orphan, and later I lost my husband. I became a widow with no family to support me. My Ara business was my only hope, but it was failing. No one came to buy from me. I couldn't even make enough to feed myself. I was desperate. Tears filled her eyes as she spoke. That's when someone approached me. They offered me a way out, a way to turn things around. They told me that if I used water from a corpse, it would change everything. They said it would make my Ara irresistible, and my business would thrive. Chidma's heart sank as she listened. Water from a corpse, she whispered, horrified. Ifan nodded, her voice barely audible. Now yes, water used to bathe a fresh corpse. I was told to add just a drop to the oil whenever I fried the Akara, and that would be enough at first. I refused. It sounded like madness, but I was desperate. I had no choice. Chidinma felt a chill run down her spine. So you did it? I did, Ifuna admitted, wiping away the tears that rolled down her cheeks. I only collected a small amount each time. Every month I would travel to the village where they bathed the corpses and gather a little water. It didn't take much, just a drop in the beans mixture each time I fried, and it worked like magic. She paused for a moment, her voice shaking. My business started booming. People couldn't get enough of my Ara. I was finally able to make enough money to live comfortably. I even saved enough to build my own house. Chidinma couldn't believe what she was hearing. So why did you leave your village? Iun lowered her head. People began to get suspicious. They couldn't explain the sudden success of my Ara. They started asking questions, whispering about me. I knew it was only a matter of time before they found out the truth. So I left. I came to Ogbede to start over, hopping to leave it all behind, and it worked. She continued, for a while everything was going well here. No one knew me and my Ara was popular just like before. But then the dogs started barking. They sense it, the dark spirits that follow me. I thought I could escape, but they found me again. The dogs, Chidinma said softly, That's why they've been following you. Yes, Ifan whispered. The spirits are angry, the dogs can sense them. And now I can't escape anymore. Chidinma stood in stunned silence, the weight of Yoon's confession heavy in the air. Between them, Ifan, she said gently, you have to confess, you can't keep living like this. The spirits won't leave you alone. Unless you tell the truth. Yun nodded slowly, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I know I've carried this burden for too long. The next morning, Chidinma and Yun quietly gathered the villagers in the market square. No one knew why they had been called, and most came out of curiosity. The elders sat at the front, while others stood around whispering among themselves. They had no idea what was about to unfold. Chidinma stayed close to Ifunanya. As she prepared to speak, Yoon's face was pale, and her hands shook slightly. But she knew this moment had to come. There was no turning back. With the entire village gathered, Yoon stepped forward, her eyes scanned the crowd, her heart heavy with the burden she had carried for so long. The village was silent, waiting for her to speak. Taking a deep breath, Yoon began her confession. She told the villagers everything she had shared with Chidinma the day before, the dark secret behind her Ara business, her desperate decision to use corpse water, and the curse that had followed her to Ogbede. She explained why the dogs had been barking, and how she had tried to leave her past behind only for it to catch up with her as her words hung in the air. The crowd stood in stunned silence. The villagers had never suspected the truth, and many gasped in shock. As the story unfolded, some couldn't believe what they were hearing, while others exchanged nervous glances. When Yoon finished, the elders stood up to discuss her fate. The crowd waited anxiously as Baba, the eldest, stepped forward to speak. His expression was grave, and his voice carried the weight of the decision that had to be made. Ifan, Baba said, you have brought great harm to this village. With your actions, you cannot remain here. The spirits are restless, and they have followed you to our land for this. You must leave. There was no protest from the crowd. The weight of the confession was too much, and the village elders had spoken. Ifana lowered her head, accepting her fate. She had known that this would be the outcome. You have until sunset to gather your belongings. Baba Musa continued, after that you must leave OG and never return. The villagers slowly began to disperse, murmuring to each other about the shocking events. Yun remained where she stood for a moment, taking in the reality of what had just happened. The life she had tried to rebuild in Ogbede had crumbled before her eyes. Chidinma stayed behind, offering Ona a quiet look of understanding. Though Yun had made terrible choices, Chidinma felt a deep sadness for her. She had been driven by desperation, and now she had lost everything once again. By sunset, Ifan had packed her few belongings into a small bundle. With one last look at the village, she began her journey down the road, leaving Ogbede behind forever. The dogs, for the first time in weeks, were silent as they watched her leave. Yoon was gone. By the time the sun had set, she had already left OG, her small bundle of belongings slung over her shoulder. The villagers resumed their usual routines, but the events of the day still weighed heavily on their minds. Whispers filled the air. People discussed the shocking revelation and the sudden downfall of the once beloved RSL. For many, it was hard to reconcile the sweet, kind woman they had come to know with the dark secret she had been hiding. The truth was difficult to swallow, and some villagers still found it hard to believe that they had unknowingly been a part of such a terrible act. As Yoon walked down the dusty road, leaving Ogbede behind, she was filled with a deep sense of regret. Everything she had worked for, everything she had built in the village, had crumbled in an instant. She had tried to outrun the consequences of her actions, but the spirits had followed her. Wherever she went now, there was no escaping them. With no clear destination in mind, Yun wandered from village to village. She could no longer start over as easily as she had done before. Word of her story had spread, and people were wary of her. The dogs continued to bark at her, following her every step, a constant reminder of the curse she had brought upon herself. The spirits of the dead had not forgiven her, and it seemed they never would. Weeks turned into months, and Effin found herself living in isolation, far from any village. She had no one to turn to, no family and no friends. She survived by doing small jobs here and there, but her once thriving Akara business was a distant memory. The spirits that had once promised her success had now turned into her tormentors. Every night, she would hear them whisper in the darkness, their voices filled with anger. She was haunted by what she had done, and the burden of her choices weighed heavily on her soul. The life she had tried to escape was now her reality, and there was no end in sight. She decided she would visit NECA. Perhaps, just perhaps, they might still be redemption for her in Ogbede. Life slowly returned to normal, but the memory of Yun lingered. The market was quiet without her stall, and people often found themselves pausing in front of the empty space where she had once stood, flipping her golden Ara. Chidinma, who had been at the center of the events that led to Iron's downfall, reflected often on the woman's fate. She had hoped that Ifon would find peace, but deep down she knew the consequences of such dark actions could not be easily undone. The village elders, including Baba Musa, gathered one evening to discuss what had happened. It was clear that the situation with Iun had been a warning one, that the entire village needed to heed. We must never forget what happened. Here Baram Musa said thoughtfully, desperation can lead people to dark places. No secret can stay hidden forever. The other elders nodded in agreement. The story of Yoon's rise and fall had touched every corner of Ogi, reminding the villagers of the importance of honesty and the dangers of taking shortcuts for personal gain. Over time, Oga healed. But the lesson remained. The villagers knew they had to be careful of the choices they made, for even the smallest decisions could have lasting consequences. If Fun's story became a reminder that no matter how far you run, the truth will always find you.